Hello everyone, this is General Hand Grenade. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. Today's video is going to be on another expansion set for Global War 1936 to 1945. This one is called Canada at War or Canada at Arms. I'm not sure which one it is because it says one way in one place and a different way in another place, but it means the same thing. Basically, what it is Canada's role in World War II. And people might think, well, geez, they didn't have a big role in World War II. One thing you have to remember that even though, like, you look at a map and you see this huge country, Canada's the second largest country on Earth, the population is very small. Today, our population just recently went over 38 million. Back in 1940, it was only at about 11 million. So, like when the war was going on, it was around the 11 million mark, and that's pretty small for a nation, especially one that was on the other side of the ocean to try to get to it. For instance, the Americans, they're about 10 times the population of what Canada is, right? So you can see the contribution would be a fraction of what a major power like America's or Great Britain's would be. Great Britain, that would be near the end of their empire, basically, right? They had an empire that went for hundreds of years. And so Canada's role, they actually did pretty well for the size of the country. Like their role, a big part of their role in the war was protecting the convoys in the Atlantic. First of all, supplying Great Britain, because Great Britain, after France fell and before America got into the war, on the European side of the world there, it was like Great Britain versus Germany, and Germany was extremely powerful, right? So, and Great Britain's an island, they needed to be supplied, and so Canada took up a huge role in supplying Great Britain, and not only sending supplies over, but also protecting those supplies. And so much of the set that you're going to get, like you look at these markers down here that say Corvette on them, those were small destroyers, like very small destroyers that were produced mainly to take out subs. And so that's what you're going to need them for. The war in the Atlantic was a really big deal. Germany trying to cut off the supplies going to Great Britain. Like, if they could have cut off those supplies for good, then Great Britain, it was only a matter of time before they fell, right? So that was one of the things they did. Another thing they did was they trained a lot of the pilots. They trained special forces. Like, they did a lot in Canada. And plus, Canadian soldiers, they went over, they fought in the Aleutian Islands, which are up here that you see, in Hong Kong, in Africa, Italy, France, Germany. Like, they fought all over the war here, just in smaller numbers than normal. On D-Day, they were assigned Juno Beach. So that's the beach that they stormed on D-Day. Anyway, so this is what you get here for this set. You don't get this thing, but you probably have one of these anyway. And hopefully, if you're buying this set, then they're going to send you one of these. That's the coaster, right? But you're going to get five territory markers there with the Canadian symbol on it. These are veteran guards markers. We're going to get into what they are. I'm not going to talk about what they are right now. Then there's also the Queen's Light Infantry markers, the Queen's Own Rifles markers. Actually, it's not the Queen's Light Infantry, it's Patricia's Light Infantry, sorry. And there's also a Devil's Brigade marker. And this is the marker for the, we'll get into that. That has to do with the training of pilots and everything. That's actually going to be pretty cool part of the game. So anyway, that's what you get with the set here from Historical Board Gaming. And then you'll just use your own units. Like, you can use just regular British units, right? You don't have to paint them if you don't want to or anything. you'll just use those, because if you've ever played this game, you understand that the Commonwealth plays as one big country. They purchase and they place their units separately, but everything else they fight together, they defend together, like not just defend together but attack together as well. You know, like you could put a British unit on a Canadian transport and transport that at the same time. It's not like you're playing with an ally. You're all like the same country when you're fighting, right? And so you don't have to use different colored stuff, but you can go and you can paint your pieces or do whatever for your Canadian army. That's up to you, right? But anyway, this is what you're going to get from Historical Board Gaming. And of course, you're going to be able to download the rules. Now, this video is coming out on the weekend. The rules, although this set is on the site, it's not for sale yet. The rules and the sets are going to be available next week. I just talked to Doug on the phone there, and he tells me next week they're going to be available. Anyway, so I will be right back and we'll talk about something more here. Before we get into how this set works, I just want to talk about the contest that I'm holding. This is a contest sponsored by Doug Friend at historicalboardgaming.com, who's going to give you all of the chips that you need, and your friend General Hand Grenade, who's going to give you all of these nicely painted units. So there's a lot more units here than you're ever going to need. Canada doesn't have a big income, but I painted up lots of units because I have lots of units, and I thought, you know, like this is what this does is it gives you choices. You know, like you can buy this or this or this. You're not going to be able to buy all of these units that are in here, but you can certainly buy a couple of them, right? And you're going to get a whole bunch of options. One of the things that I did, and I said this on the video that I made last weekend, you see these things down here, these are the Corvettes. I made these myself. I found some Xeno Games units, I guess that's what they were from, and I cut off the back of them here to make them smaller. They were cruisers, and that's kind of like what a Flower Class Corvette looked like. So there you go. You can put it on top of these chips or just have them without the chips. Anyway, there's going to be 6 of those, and there's going to be a submarine, and there's going to be a couple of those Anzac transports, a couple of the Anzac destroyers, and then there's an escort carrier and a British cruiser. Now, you take a look at the planes over here. There's tons of planes, right? Like I've got a couple of different kinds of fighters here. The Hurricane and I think the P-51, I'm not sure. Anyway, there's a couple of kinds of fighters there. There's a tactical bomber here. There's a transport plane. There's a medium bomber. There's a strategic bomber. There's a couple of swordfish fighters here. And you see these stands here. You're going to get all of those stands. And no, these things aren't glued on here or like I used to do. These have been on here, put on here by magnets. See, there's the magnets on them, right? So, like the escort carrier over here, that also has a magnet on it, okay? So I've magnetized everything, and I've given you flight stands. And aside from those naval units, I've also given you these naval units. Now, you're probably, like I said, you're not going to need all this stuff. You'd be lucky if you ever put one destroyer on, or, you know, like maybe never even use a carrier or a cruiser. But I know before I started playing 1936, I was playing Axis and Allies, and so I would try to adapt sets to that. And this is one of those sets that I believe that you can adapt to Axis and Allies if you wanted to, right? Like you might want to change a few of the rules or whatever. You'll see when we get through and get into the rules. But anyway, if you were playing 36, there's no way you'd be able to buy a battleship or a fleet carrier because it's just not part of the rules. You'll play Canada a lot like you play Anzac, and so there's not going to be a major shipyard in Canada, and so therefore there's no way you'll ever be able to buy these pieces. But I threw them in, and again, magnetized, a couple of magnets on there, right? That's magnetized, and the battleship, and then I had lots of stuff, so I just threw in a couple of Liberty transports, and a couple of the regular destroyers there. I'm not sure if those ones are American or if they're British or whatever. But anyway, there's all that stuff. Then you've got your infantry. So there's a mountain infantry. There's airborne here, but I don't have the airborne chips yet. They should be in the mail this week. And so I'll put the airborne on airborne chips as well. And it's glued on there, right? I like to glue my pieces on there. Then there's 4 just regular infantry. What else we got here? Oh, we've got custom infantry. 4 custom infantry. Then there's this guy here, commando, because the Devil's Brigade is a commando. So there you go. He goes on that chip there. Then there's a couple of Valentine tanks. Valentine tanks, they were produced in Canada, but Canadians really didn't use them that much. What they used was an offshoot of the Sherman tank, but they kind of changed it a bit and gave it their own name. Like I think the first edition of the Sherman tank that the Canadians used was called a Grizzly. So that's the name I'm going with. That's a Grizzly tank. There's the self-propelled artillery. There's a tank destroyer. There's a light tank. You won't be building any heavy tanks because, again, you can't build any of the specialty weapons outside of the UK. That's the home country of all of the Commonwealth nations. So you wouldn't be able to anyway. What else? What else we got for ground units here? Okay, we got a couple of Kangaroo mechs. We got cavalry. We got a Mack truck. We got a anti-aircraft gun. There's one of those Humber Scout cars. A couple of 25-pound artillery, and a howitzer. Wow, this is a lot of stuff. This is probably the best prize that's ever been offered on my channel. I'm not sure if it is in terms of dollars or whatever, but I tell you, it took a lot of work putting it together and everything, and so I'm saying it's the best prize. Now, you'll find when we go through the rules that you can build planes for other nations. Well, they can build planes, but on your territory, and they're going to be cheap, right? So I figured, why not include them? There's the Anzac plane, there's the FEC plane, there's the French plane, there's the British plane. There's no American plane because the Americans are not part of that. But these 4 nations will be able to build planes in Canada. And so I wanted to include one of them for each of them because then I could put magnets on them, right? Then you would at least have magnets for these ones here. And so I'm giving you my old flight stands. I'm not giving you my new ones. I'm going to give you my old flight stands. These are the Field Marshal Games flight stands. I believe you can still buy them, or actually they're not Field Marshal Games anymore, but Will Never Grow Up sells these if you wanted to add to your flight stand collection. But anyway, I'm just giving those away. So if you've got one of these planes in Australia, then you know, well, that one came from Canada because he's on a flight stand. So that's kind of cool. Anyway, so this is the prize that I'm giving away. Me and, of course, Historical Board Gaming are giving away. And the reason I'm putting this in the middle of the video is kind of like that I did with the last couple prizes, is because people are trying to game the system here. They're just skipping to the end of the video, or maybe watching the very beginning of the video or something. On the last video that I put out where I was sitting at my kitchen table there last weekend, somebody commented on there that they wanted to enter the contest. And so I'm reading his comment and I'm going, what contest? I didn't have a contest for this video. So no guessing. You know, you actually have to watch the video in order to find out what the contest is. So you have to do something very specific. So me being a Canadian, and this being a Canadian set of units and everything, and being a wicked-ass Canadian set of units, I want you to say something nice about Canada in the comments. You don't have to, of course. You can say whatever you want. The internet is democratic. You could say anything you want about Canada. You could call us a bunch of assholes or whatever. Doesn't matter. But that'll disqualify you from the contest. The judge isn't going to allow that. And the judge is me. So you could say something about Canada's contribution during the war, or you can just say, what's your favorite thing about Canada? You know, like, is it the Rocky Mountains, or is it young grasshopper, or, you know, rank carcass, or there's lots of great things about Canada. It could be the people, how friendly they are. It could be any number of things. Like for the Canadians, it'll be easy to answer this question. Like we've got so much to be thankful for living in this beautiful country of ours. But for the rest of you, you know something about Canada. Maybe you just like beaver. I don't know. Just say something nice. And don't tell anybody why you're saying that, because we don't want people reading that and then entering the contest without watching the video. It'll give you a better chance to win if you don't explain it to them. I'm saying this. I'm saying I like beaver because I want to win the prize, because somebody else is just going to write that down too, right? Instead of watching the video. And then you've got a less chance of winning. Oh, I forgot something here. Look at that. You're also going to get a large complex. That goes on Ottawa. And this one here is small complex. You're probably going to want to put that on Prince George. Right here, right where I live. Oh, I don't know where you're going to put it. But anyway, if you put it on Prince George, then you could defend the West Coast against those gnarly Japanese. Anyway, so that's what the prize is. So I'm not going to say anything after this, okay? If you want to enter this contest, you know what to do now. Anyway, we'll get back to checking out this set. Okay, one last quick thing before I move on here. I was showing you the prize that you get. Well, I also took the liberty of putting it into this case here, and I got a sticker made up. That's the picture that's on Historical Board Gaming. And there are, so you get the coaster in there, and there are all the units that I showed you. So it fits just perfectly in there. Anyway, shh, don't tell anybody there's a prize for this video. So, let's get to the setups and how to play this. I'll just show you this while we're over here. The setups on this side, there's the Patricias. It's also the Queen's Light Infantry, but it's called technically it's called Princess Patricia's Light Infantry. It says on the setup chart, and I'm not sure if the setup chart is going to change when it gets to the website or not. I know I've got an early edition of it, right? It says the Canadian Prairies, and there's a couple of territories on here that are Canadian Prairies. There's the Alberta-Saskatchewan territory. Those are both prairie provinces. And then there's also the Manitoba territory that's on the other side of the board. But I can tell you with 100% certainty that the Princess Patricia's Light Infantry is located right here in Edmonton, Alberta. Ryan Carcass's neck of the woods, and I can tell you that because I've actually stayed there. I had a son-in-law who was in the Patricias. So I've actually stayed at that base before, so I know that's where it is. So that's where it should go, is Alberta, Saskatchewan. And then that's the setup on that side of the board. And then over here, there's the Queen's Rifles. Where's my stick there? I can't reach the other side of the board without it. Okay, so here's the Queen's Rifles here, and they're actually based out of Toronto, not downtown Toronto. I'm not sure exactly where in Toronto it is because I haven't been to that base. But here they're called CFB. Before my son-in-law was transferred to Edmonton, he was at CFB Borden, which is somewhere in Ontario here. But anyway, the Queen's Own Rifles are in Ontario here, along with the major factory, like that you get from the normal setup, right? Now, the changes in the setup, you notice there was a naval base in BC there. There's also a naval base here. That's what you would normally get. That's what it says for the setups. But in the new edition, when you get your new map, you'll see that there's also a naval base right here. So once you get the new map, then this third naval base will be on there. But if you're working with the old set of rules, then it's just this naval base here and the one in British Columbia. Here, there's normally a transport and a torpedo boat destroyer. Those are British units. So you're going to replace them with Canadian units. You're going to put down one corvette and one transport. Now, if you're not winning my prize, then you would put this down instead, right? So there you go. You get a corvette and a transport, but we're using my units now. See, mine's got color coding there. With 2 units, that's just how I do my units. There's so many boats and so many planes in this game, I just find it helpful. Anyway, that's how you would set this up. So, money now. Let me just get my computer over here. I don't have all this printed off. I didn't see the point of printing it off since this isn't the final set of rules anyway. There's one more thing to do with the setup, and that's the Germans. The Germans are going to get 4 free submarines. You see there's 4 of them here on the ship and facility chart. Now normally you wouldn't put them past stage 1 on the ship and facility chart, right? So these things are going to go down when Germany goes to war, so probably when they attack France and Poland, right? Then you're going to put 1 down on each spot there. And the reason that they're spread out along here, like you're going to get them for free. You're not going to have to pay to move them along or anything. They just don't want you sticking 4 subs on at once, right? So you put 1 sub here, 1 sub here, 1 sub here, 1 sub here. Then, you know, like you'll put this sub on and these 3 subs will move up, right? And then you'll put this sub on and then these 2 subs will move up and this sub goes on. So it'll take four turns to get these 4 subs on, right? But that's not until you go to war. And the reason for that is because the Allied production is actually going to go up slightly playing with these rules. So here we see like the British here. I've taken everything off so we don't need all the other stuff on there. The British start in 1936 with $11, right? What you're going to do is you're going to take them down $1. And then you got the Canadian roundel here, you're going to put that at 2. So at peace, the Canadians are going to have, the Allies are going to have +1 already, right? So that's why, you know, like with the subs. Now, there's also bonuses, and we'll get into those too. Like peacetime bonuses, this could go up to 4, right? The Canadian income when you are at war, once the Commonwealth goes to war, the Canadian income automatically goes up to 5. And then there's wartime bonuses, and we'll get into those a bit later as well. We'll talk about the bonuses. But anyway, that's all you need to know about this, is that the British income is going to go down 1 and the Canadian income is going to start at 2. Now, if you started in 1939, here, let me just take a quick look at that. Got to scroll down here. If you started in 1939, then you will start at 5 and you reduce the British by 5. So what does the British go to? 24. So the British wartime income now is going to be 19 when the Commonwealth is at war, right? It's not going to be 24 anymore. It's going to be 19. So that'll be the base income for the British, and the Canadians are going to be at 5. Okay? So that's how that works. But there is more of a chance for some Canadian bonuses in there. So let's let me just reset and I'll be right back. Okay, so as I was saying earlier, Canada is part of the British Commonwealth. And so like the other Commonwealth nations in the game, the FEC and ANZAC, they're also going to have the same technology, right? So here, like for instance, let's say British, let's say they, I don't know, they get strategic rockets or something, I don't know. They wouldn't want strategic rockets, but let's say they got them. That means that Canada also has strategic rockets. Now, you could build them, or that's radar, I guess. There's a few of these that you have to build in the home territory. Like, I don't think that you could build jet aircraft. But anyway, but improved shipyards is one. Like, if you have improved shipyards, then the cost of your corvettes is going to go from 4 to 3. So that's a good one. That's a good example of one right there. Heavy battleships or heavy carriers, you're not going to be building those for the Canadians anyway. But anyway, improved shipyards. If Britain develops improved shipyards, then Canada will have improved shipyards. If they have a shipyard, I think that actually, I'm going to have to find that out. You know, like if they're going to improve these for this set. That's a good question. I should have asked them, because you're not going to be able to build ships at a regular naval base, right? You're going to need a minor shipyard at the least in order to build any kind of ship, right? You would need a major shipyard to build a capital ship, but a minor shipyard to build so I'm going to have to ask them about that. Now there's something in this called remote territories. So like these are regular territories here, Quebec and Ontario and Manitoba, Nova Scotia down here. These are actually British territories, Labrador and Newfoundland. Those territories, they didn't become part of Canada until after World War II. So they were the last ones to join Confederation. But these territories here, there's Baffin Island, and then what's that called? I can't even read that. District of, I'm upside down here. Anyway, that territory there. And here, okay, here it is, District of Mackenzie, I guess they want to call it. It's actually, back then I think it was called the Northwest Territories. Now it's called Nunavut, but that's the Northwest Territories. So this is actually the one that I was having trouble reading. It's the same territory. It's just an enormous territory. There's about 20 people that live up there. There's more than that, but not many more. And then there's the Yukon Territory. So these northern territories that are north of the provinces are down here, and then the territories are up top. Those are all remote territories, and there's special rules regarding those. Like here, you can't walk into this territory here. There's no land movement in these territories whatsoever, unless you want to build a road. So on non-combat movement, what you would do is go in here and pay 4 IPP. I don't have any road markers, but I think they have some now at historicalboardgaming.com. Then you could build a road. You just put a road down in this territory here, and then you can use that for the rest of the game. So then if you walked over here and paid another $4, then you could build a road right there too. So that's one of the things is that you can't move in those remote territories. And it's the same with these ones over here. We're not going to get into talking about the terrain features up there just now, because that's not what this video is about. Let me just head down to the other side of the table here. I wish I could do this from down here, but I just can't reach to the top there. So, so like I said, $4 to construct a road, and that allows permanent access. And now these territories are extremely sparsely populated. 90% of the Canadian population, even to this day, lives within 200 miles of the American border. That would be about here. About here. 90% of the Canadian population lives all along the American border. If you didn't know that, that's where I live in Prince George. That's about 500 miles north of the American border. We're considered northern Canada, even though we're a long ways away from northern Canada. The people in the north would scoff at us calling ourselves northern Canada because they're like thousands of miles north of us. Like, put it this way, there's no polar bears where I live, okay? You'd have to go another 1,000 or 2,000 miles to find a polar bear north of where I am. So those are remote territories, and they're sparsely populated, and because they're sparsely populated, you can't have militia pop up there. Because there's just nobody to turn into militia, right? There's not enough people to turn into a militia unit. And also they're underdeveloped. So if you want to build a facility, that's going to cost you an extra IPP. So we're talking naval base or an air base or something. That's going to cost you +1. And a factory is going to cost you +3. But I don't imagine you're ever going to build, you know, factories and air bases up north up there. Like they're not worth anything. So I'm not sure why anybody would attack them. About the only thing that I could see happening is, like, say the Japanese wanted to attack Alaska, but again, remote territories we're talking, like they'd have to, there's no roads coming down here, right? So I don't see why you would want to build your facilities up here. In fact, I don't even see why you would want to move up to those territories there. Not just in game sense, but in real sense. Unless you're developing resources, which we aren't in this game, right? And which we weren't back then either. So, so those are remote territories. Now, there's veteran guards. Let me just show you the chip on those things here. Let's move this over and we'll put this down. See, these are the veteran guards chips, and you get 3 of those. And you can just use the chip if you want, but I like to put a unit on top of my chip. Okay, so I'll just read you what it says here because there's a lot of information. It says, during the Great War, Canada had seen opposition from a segment of Canadians to conscription for overseas service in the war, culminating in conscription riots in some eastern Canadian cities. Well, that was a nice way of putting it. Really what it was the people of Quebec didn't want to go, because the reason Canada went to war was not so that we wouldn't speak German in the future. It was to defend the crown. And the people of Quebec are, especially at that time, did not feel the same affinity to the crown as the English people do. Quebec is a French-speaking province. So Quebec didn't see the point of Canada going to war and sending guys over there and dying and everything for another nation, basically. They thought that we should just stay home, right? So it was mostly, when it says opposition, that's really what they're talking about, is Quebec. With the outbreak of the Second World War, the Canadian government adopted conscription for home service. It allowed for conscription for the defense of Canada, but did not allow conscripts to be deployed overseas. Only those who volunteered, the A-men, would be deployed to overseas theaters. So the volunteer army. So barring the Veteran Guard of Canada units, Canada may not build or lend lease more than one land unit per turn until any land zone in Canada or the British-controlled areas of Labrador and Newfoundland have been attacked or strategically bombed, or there are enemy land units in an adjacent territory to any Canadian homeland territory, which would obviously be an American territory, right? Because on both sides of the map, the only thing adjacent to Canadian territory is American territory. So if Canada is attacked, or if these two territories are attacked, or if anybody occupies any of the American territories, if that doesn't happen, then you can only build one land unit per turn for Canada. And it's also no air or land units, barring the Queen's Own or the Patricia divisions, may leave Canada until Canada is at war with a major power. So you remember that one guy we sat down in Edmonton there, and also this guy over here. Those are the only two things of Canadians that are allowed to leave Canada. Everybody else, not C units, but everybody else that is a land unit or air unit has to stay in Canada. The Aerodrome of Democracy. So that is, I guess I was getting ahead of myself with the veteran chip there. Let's put this chip down. So this is the Aerodrome of Democracy chip here, and you can see it's got a fighter on it there. So this will go down in Ottawa here. Okay. Oh, that's not Ottawa. This, I had this in the wrong place. These guys are all supposed to be over here, even though these guys here were actually in that territory. This is what you do. You put them there in the capital of Canada. My mistake. Okay. The British Air Commonwealth Training Plan, BCATP, remains the single largest aviation training programs in history, and was responsible for training half the Air Force personnel of near the entirety of the entire British Commonwealth, as well as French, Czechoslovakians, Norwegians, Greek, Polish, and many other nations that had fallen to Axis aggression. The plan was set up across the whole of the British Commonwealth, but the vast majority of aircrew were trained in Canada. Subsequently, Canada took great and justifiable pride in the Aerodrome of Democracy. So once Canada's at war with a major power, well, once the Commonwealth is, obviously, Canada may purchase that chip that I showed you that went down in Ottawa for 5 IPP to mark that the plan is activated. So you buy that chip, you put it in Ottawa, and there you go, that plan is activated. So what happens then is each major power aligned with the Commonwealth, and including Britain, may purchase a single aircraft at a 2 IPP discount and place it in any Canadian territory not already training an aircraft on the purchasing nation's turn, disregarding Canadian factories and production limits. So you don't have to put these planes at a factory. You can just put them in any territory. And like if you're ANZAC, here, what did I do with the units there? So, like if you were Anzac, you'd probably want to place it over here in British Columbia, right? So Anzac comes up with $8 and they say, I'm building a plane in Canada. And there you go. You just put one down that doesn't have to be, there doesn't have to be anything there. I mean, as far as factories go, you would just place it there, right? The unit is transferred to the purchasing nation via the Lend-Lease process. Only one foreign, non-Canadian air unit can be built in each territory during each calendar term. So let me just move a couple more things out of the way here. So, what they're saying there is, now we got to get this thing down to Anzac, right? So Anzac on their turn for 8 IPP instead of 10, they built a fighter in Canada. Now they could fly this thing if they wanted to, but what they would probably more likely do is lend-lease it, basically lend-leasing it to themselves, right? So on the following Anzac turn, or the following Commonwealth turn, I guess it would be the same as the Canadian turn, wouldn't it? You would pick the path, and you would take it down the least, and you would go from naval base to naval base, right? Like with the Lend-Lease rules. That's how you would transfer those planes that you bought, and that represents the aerodrome of democracy that they had. And so that's kind of cool that you could do that. I mean, you are further away. Like it'd be quicker for you to build a plane over there right in Australia, but it's cheaper for you to build it up there. And when you're building them for this over here, then like for the British, then it's not such a stretch to build it over here and then just fly it out to a carrier or whatever, right? So, or lend-leasing it, I guess you have to do. Anyway, that's the aerodrome of democracy. We'll be right back. So the next unit we have is the Devil's Brigade, and that's this chip right here. So what I'm using here is a commando, because that's what they were. They were a special forces unit, right? So I'm using the commando chip. Now, they were actually called the first special service force. But they were really known as the Devil's Brigade. People also called them the Black Devil's Brigade, Freddy's Freighters. They had a few games. What they were was an American-Canadian unit. There was a lot more Americans in the unit than there was Canadians because, again, like I go back to what I said earlier, there's 10 times the population in America as there is in Canada. So, the lion's share of these units were American, but in this set you're getting a Canadian one to symbolize Canada's contribution to that unit. So what they were an elite American-Canadian commando unit in World War II. They were under the command of the United States Fifth Army. They trained at Fort William Henry Harrison near Helena, Montana. I know some people from Helena, Montana. Anyway, so that would be right about here. So they actually trained down here in the United States. So that's the origins of that unit there. And so how do you use that? Okay, let's come over here. We got some German set up here. Now there's a couple of ways to use this. Let's just take a look here. So let's set this sucker down here. Now, they're attack 2, defense 1, movement 2, and cost 3. They're not very good on defense. Like a normal regular infantry class unit would be attack 2 and defense 4. The reason that their defense is only 1 is because they were a very small unit. They were just a commando unit, right? So I mean, if somebody was going to storm them with a brigade or something, then that's tough to stop that with just a small unit, right? But so what this unit will do here, hang on. Like they specialize in slipping behind enemy front lines and damaging factories, infrastructure, cutting enemy supply lines. So they're specialist infantry. They're a lot like my Global War Heroes. in that they take on the characteristics of the other infantry. So they have the same special abilities as Marines, where like they don't have to take double casualties if they're doing an amphibious assault, or they're airborne, so they can attack. They can do an attack move as an airborne unit, and also mountain infantry. They don't suffer the mountain penalty when they're in a mountain, and they're +1 when they're defending in a mountain. So that's the special abilities of these things. Now you can only purchase one of them, and you have to wait until the Commonwealth is at war, when Canada is at war, right? So once Canada's at war, you can buy that guy. You can only have one of them though. So if he dies, well then the chip comes off and everything, and then okay, I'm gonna buy one. So then you can buy a new one, right, and put him on. So the movement, like I said, is at 2, right? Now the movement is considered to be during the through the air, but it doesn't require a transport plane to do that. You could use a transport plane because a transport plane can fly further, so you could fly him over there on a transport plane, or you could just fly him, like if he was in London here, you could just fly him across the water, right? 2 spaces. So the brigade may rail any distance without using a rail move, and can be taken as cargo by rail or transports without taking space. So if you had transport here, you could have 2 dudes on that, or a dude, a tank or whatever, 2 units on the transport plus this guy. Okay, like I said, they're a small unit, and so they don't take up any space. And the same with on the rails. So you could use up when you're doing your Commonwealth railing, and every zone has different rail movement abilities, right? Whether you're in Africa or whether you're in Europe or Asia or whatever, they all have a different amount that you can rail. That guy doesn't take up any rail space, so if your rail capacity is 2, you can still rail 2 guys too, and then rail this guy as well. He's not going to take up any room on the train, or not enough room anyway. And while he's moving, they can't be intercepted or stopped by the presence of enemy aircraft. So normally, like if you were to fly a plane over top of another fighter, an enemy fighter, that fighter gets to engage in combat with you if they want. Whereas this guy, when he's not using a plane, right, then like if there was a German fighter here, and this guy was going to fly over to Berlin 2 spaces away, then that fighter wouldn't stop this guy, okay? These guys are sneaky little bastards, remember that. Anyway, so that's how they move. Now, you can use them as a regular unit, like in combat and everything. Like I said, they attack at 2 and defend at 1. But the other thing you can do is use him as a raider. So they can directly attack any facility instead of the units in a zone. You do a D6 points of damage to that facility, and then it's subject by attack by up to 3 infantry class units, including cavalry, that are in the zone, and they don't get a defense roll. So this guy wouldn't attack these guys. He would just attack the factory. So what happens is you can go up to 2 spaces, right? Let's say this is a British space right here. So let's say you go into Moscow, and you got to make a choice. Am I going to attack these 3 guys, or am I going to attack this facility? So you're going in there just simply to attack the facility. So you'll go in there and you'll roll a 6-sided dice. Let's say you roll a 5. Well, then 5 points of damage go on underneath this factory here. Now, then the Germans get to roll up to 3 units that are in there, infantry class or cavalry units. So I just happen to have 3 in here. There's an infantry, there's a Volkssturm, and there's a cavalry. So they're all going to get 1 shot at this guy. Let's say they miss. Let's say they all roll and they all miss, okay? Then this guy gets to go 2 spaces after that, because he can't stay in there, right? Like he didn't attack the units and take it over. He gets to go 2 spaces to a friendly territory. So it doesn't matter what direction. If it's unlikely, but if they own Slovakia, then he could go there, right? He could go to Lorraine but let's just say he's going to go back to the Netherlands. Again, moving through the air, and and enemy aircraft is not going to stop their movement. But that's how you would use them for strategic bombing, basically. Is you could go after that. You could go after an air base. You could go after a shipyard, a naval base, any kind of base you want. So anyway, that's the Devil's Brigade. So now we have the Veteran Guard of Canada. You get 3 of these chips, right? And again, like I like to put a unit on top. You don't have to. You could just use the chip if you want. So they were comprised of veterans of the Great War, World War I, right? They were called up to protect Canada from invasion and secure installations. So they're kind of like the Volkssturm, right? They can move around in Canada. They're a militia unit and they move around. They don't have an attack value though. Their attack is 0, their defense is 2, their movement is 1, and they cost 2. So they're available for purchase once Canada is at war with a major power, and you can have a maximum of 3 of them in play at any one time. So you can put 3 of them on the board. But they're considered a militia, and they can only move in the Canadian homeland or in Newfoundland or Labrador. So they can also go to these 2 spaces here, Newfoundland and Labrador, but they can't go anywhere else. There's the yellow territories and the ones on the other side of the board, or Newfoundland and Labrador. Those are the only places that they can move. And also, I was saying earlier how you can only build 1 land unit per turn. That does not include, oops, that's the wrong guy. That does not include this guy here. The Veteran Guards, you can build 1 land unit, but you can also build these guys. So you could build 3 of these in 1 turn plus a land unit. But remember, though, you don't have very much money, right? So likely all you're going to be building is that guy. So anyway, he's not part of that per turn number of units that you could build for Canada. Okay, so this guy right here, this is the one that's on Ottawa, the Queen's Own rifles down here. Now, they were initially the Volunteer Militia Rifles of Canada. They've taken part in lots of wars. They began in 1860 when they put them together. But anyway, a number of wars they were in. So they're an infantry class unit. They're a militia for all purposes, but may move outside of the Canadian home country at any time, even prior to Canadian entry in the war. So there's actually 2, the Patricias and the Queen's Own Rifles here. Those are the only land units that can move outside of Canada before Canada's at war. So they attack at 2, they defend at 2, they move 1, and they cost 2. So again, they're just a light strength unit, but they can actually leave the country, unlike the veteran ones. And only 1 of them can be in play at a time. If it's destroyed, it can be rebuilt at any Commonwealth factory, but are subject to that limitation again. So let's say this guy gets killed, right? Well, when you build him, you could build him in Canada, or if there probably will be a factory in London, you could put him in London if you wanted to. But remember, you can only build 1 land unit per turn in Canada, except for the veteran units, right? So you could build them here, you could build them in South Africa, you could build him in Australia, you could build him in FEC, like anywhere, any Commonwealth factory you could build that unit in. But again, the per turn limit, that's what you have to remember. So then the other one is much the same, and that's this guy here, the Princess Patricia's Light Infantry. Now, it was formed at the outbreak of World War I, and they fought with distinction. Like, they're a really tough branch of the Canadian military, believe me. But they fought at Vimy Ridge and Passchendaele, and they fought in Eastern Russia in the Russian Civil War. In World War II, they landed in Sicily, in Italy, Netherlands, so they fought in a lot of different places. Now, they're basically the same as the other guys there. They attack at 2, defend at 2, they move 1, and they cost 2. So they're militia, but they can move outside of Canada. And again, they can be built at a Commonwealth factory. So exactly the same as the other guys. You have to remember the per turn limits of 1. So you could build this guy at a factory in Canada, or you could build him in a different Commonwealth factory. But if you did that, then you couldn't put a tank in Canada. You know what I mean? Because you've already built your land unit. So these guys here are the Princess Patricias. If you're wondering who Princess Patricia was, we don't actually have a monarchy in Canada. Our monarchy is the throne in England, right? So we have a Governor General, as do a lot of Commonwealth countries, right? And so the Governor General is Canada's representative, or is the Queen's representative in Canada. And I think like Australia has one, and I don't know who else. But anyway, at the time of the First World War, and around the turn of the century, I don't remember exactly what the dates are, but we had a Governor General who was Lord Stanley, and he was British, right? But he was in Canada. He was the Queen's representative, and they had a lot more power back then. Like nowadays, it's largely ceremonial. Like the Canadian government says, we want to do this, and the Governor General basically rubber stamps it, says they're doing this, you know. But back then, the guy actually, you know, he said, no, I don't think you should do that. The Queen wouldn't like it, you know. But anyway, so they actually wielded a lot of power. But if you're wondering who Lord Stanley was, you might have heard of the Stanley Cup that the Canadian, the hockey playoffs are on right now, the NHL playoffs. And they play for the Stanley Cup. That was Lord Stanley. And also Stanley Park, which is down in Vancouver here. Very famous park on the shores of, in West Vancouver there. That's, again, Lord Stanley. So, Patricia was his daughter. She was just this little girl. And so, because he was thought of as royalty because he was the Queen's representative, they called his daughter Princess Patricia. And so, the Army named the light infantry after her. Fun fact! Anyway, I'll be right back. Okay, so let's talk about these corvettes, these little ships here. So you're going to get these chips, and I've got these, so I'll just put them on there for now. So the Corvette Navy, as they were known as, they were from the Royal Canadian Navy, and they fought in the Battle of the Atlantic against the German U-boats. Basically what they was just escorts for the convoys, but they were pretty small, so they were fast and they were maneuverable, right? Like they could scramble around pretty good. And but they weren't as powerful as a destroyer, put it that way. Basically what these things are is very small destroyers. Here, let me show you a destroyer here. Now, I don't know if this would be scale, right? But this is the destroyer I have, and that's the little Corvette that I have. It might even be smaller than that in relationship to a destroyer. But anyway, a destroyer would be even more powerful. And in this game, a destroyer attacks and defends at 4, whereas the Corvette in this game, it attacks and defends at 2, it moves at 2, and it only costs 4. So basically, it's a half a destroyer is what it is. And the reason that it's going to be handy in this game is because it's going to be difficult to protect all of your convoy zones in the game. So you're going to need a low-cost ship in order to do it, right? So this costs half as much a destroyer does, so you'll be able to produce more of them, right? Even though like Canada doesn't have that much money, at least you're going to be able to produce those corvettes, right? And that's probably a lot of what you're going to purchase with the Canadian money. Like I showed you all of those units that I had built for my Canadian country there, so I'd have, you know, that's my Canadian units there. I showed you all of those. Now, there's all of those units, but you're not going to be purchasing all of those. You might purchase 1 or 2 or 3 of them. A lot of what you're going to be doing is obviously purchasing some land units to protect yourself from the Germans and the Japanese and the Italians, but also these corvettes and any other type of boats or planes. Anything that's going to give you an advantage in the Battle of the Atlantic, the fight against the subs. And then later on in the game, maybe you're transporting units over to England and then onto the mainland over there, like once America enters the war, right? and the subs start to falter. At least that's been my my experience in the game anyway. So you can build corvettes once you're at war with a major power. So you can't build them before that, although you do start the game with one of them. And you can build up to 2 of them per turn. And so they cost 4, like I said, but if you had improved shipyards, then that lowers the cost to 3. And the other thing is, they're chosen last in combat. So, like, you're going to fight together with the British Navy and the any of the Commonwealth boats, right? So you're not going to be able to just buy a bunch of those and stick them in with the British Navy and then use them for cannon fodder, because like transports, that they're going to have to be taken last in combat. So you know, like, you can't just take those off and leave the cruisers and the carriers and stuff like that, and the planes. So they're like escort capable warships using the same escort modifiers as a destroyer. So when you're modifying the roles when it comes to convoying, you're going to use the destroyer rules. Now I'm just going to let you I'm not going to tell you what that is, because I'm not exactly certain what they'll be in the new ones. I think I know, but I'm going to have that confirmed for me in the next week. But you know, in the game that you're playing right now, the version 2, what that is at right now. So that's the strength of them, is whatever you're playing it at right now. Okay, so looking at the bonuses. Now, peacetime bonuses. If an Axis submarine ends their turn on a British convoy line, so any British convoy line, anywhere on the map, any British convoy line, if an Axis submarine landed on it, so that's in the Pacific, in the Mediterranean, in the Indian Ocean, in the Atlantic, the South Atlantic, anywhere, then you're going to get a +1. Not +1 for each one, just +1. This is the Canadian income, right? And this is while you're at peace. And then when Germany annexes Sudetenland, which on the new map is actually called Bohemia, then you're going to get +1 for that as well, and that's when you're at peace. Now, your wartime bonus income is if the London Halifax convoy line is free of enemy warships. So this is the London Halifax line right here. That goes from London all the way to Halifax, Nova Scotia, right? So if that is free of warships, Axis warships, then you're going to get +2 IPP. Now remember, you're going to lose the peacetime bonus incomes at this point, right? And you're going to go with the wartime incomes. So that's +2. Alberta Saskatchewan territory is connected via undamaged major factory via railway. So here's your factory here, and here's your railroad, and I could take my camera over there, but basically it's right here. So as long as this territory and this territory and the Alberta Saskatchewan territory are still Canadian, then you're going to get +1 for that. And if Canada and the US are jointly at war with a common enemy, so basically once the US goes to war and they're at war with Germany or Japan or whatever, and Canada's at war with them as well, they will have been at war with them probably long before the Americans, then that's +1. So your wartime bonus income would be a total of 4, and your peacetime bonus income would be a total of 2 if you were able to gather all those bonuses. So remember, like, your peacetime normal income is only 2, so if you add 2 to that, then you're only going to get 4. You're not going to be able to afford much before you go to war, and then after you go to war, the most you could possibly get is 9, unless of course you took out some territories, right? I'm not going to play next weekend, with the diplomacy rules, so Canada isn't going to have, I don't even know if, I haven't read those rules yet. I don't know if a minor power could possibly influence the neutral countries anyway. But if Canada was able to, say, take a German territory or an Italian territory, then that would up their income, right? And that's why you get the Canadian roundels, in case you took out some territory. What else? Canada surrenders if Ottawa is conquered. So that's the city here. So if this city is conquered, then Canada surrenders. And basically all you really need to know is that that you play Canada much like you play Anzac as far as rules go. So you're going to move at the same time as the rest of the Commonwealth nations. I usually do it one at a time. Like I don't move back and forth. I move this UK guy and that Anzac guy and this UK guy and this FEC guy and that Anzac guy. To me it's easier to do something cohesive if I'm going to finish the Anzac off, unless of course there's some kind of combined attack or something where Anzac and FEC are fighting somebody, or UK or whatever. I could see there being a lot more coordination over here between Great Britain and Canada, so I could see you moving them all the same there. The only change you're really making is that the income that you get for Canada is spent in Canada. It's not spent anywhere else in the world like it would be if you were the UK. And I assume, even though it doesn't say in the rules, that the 11 IPP that comes with the Netherlands, that you split up among the Commonwealth nations, I would assume that Canada would be a part of that as well now. Like if you wanted, you could give them $1 or $2 or 11 if you had them. I doubt if you'd have that many though, because they would be the Netherlands would be at war, and so they've probably lost some territories. But anyway, that would be a part of that. They're basically just another Commonwealth nation that you purchase and place separately than everybody else. Anyway, so that's Canada at War, or Canada at Arms if you prefer. I think it's going to be a really cool set, and I can't wait to play it next weekend. I think I mentioned this, but the guy that came up with the idea for this set, that wrote the rules and then and submitted them to Doug and Will at Historical Board Gaming, and they adjusted them, I guess, probably. He's going to be here for the game next weekend, so the first time we play this set, we'll be lucky enough to have the guy that actually came up with this rule set. So I encourage you to watch that game next weekend if you want to see how this turns out with the Canadian units, and you can be assured that we won't be making any mistakes, because the guy that made up the rules is going to be here. Anyway, I can't think of anything more, so yeah, the set goes on sale this week. I think it's $15 at historicalboardgaming.com. So take care, everyone. General Hand Grenade out.